The wind didn't just blow across the western plains, it scoured the land, a relentless dry rasp that carried more dust than any whisper of rain. It was the scorching summer of 1885, and the earth of West Texas had gone 3 years without a decent drink, turning the once rich topsoil into a vast cracked tapestry. The sun, a brassy disk in the pale sky, bore down with merciless intensity, baking the ground until it fractured into deep, irregular patterns that looked like ancient scarred leather. Skeletal tumbleweeds ghosted past deserted shacks, monuments to the scores of broken promises and frontier dreams that had withered under this harsh, unforgiving sky. Eleanor Vance stood on the warped, splintered porch of her cabin. At 29, she moved with the careful, economic grace of a person whose body had been molded by constant, exhausting labor. Her face, though still beautiful, was etched with lines not of age, but of unyielding grief and hardship, giving her a severe, almost statuary presence. Her dark, resilient hair was pulled back in a severe, practical braid, peppered prematurely with strands of silver at the temples. The faded blue calico dress she wore was a concession to decency, but beneath it, she wore sturdy men's trousers and boots, a silent, practical rebellion against a world that expected her to fail. 8 months. That's how long it had been since the ranch's heavy logging chain had snapped, taking her husband Daniel with it. He hadn't suffered, they said, but Eleanor had seen his crushed body. She knew suffering. The memory was a cold, sharp shard she carried constantly. In that brutal instant, she had gone from protected wife to solitary guardian, left with 60 acres of obstinate land and a 5-year-old son, Finn, to feed. "Mama, the horses won't eat the hay," young Finn called out, his voice thin with worry, echoing from the shade of the lean-to. He had Daniel's shock of bright, unruly red hair, but his eyes, those were Eleanor's, a penetrating adult gray that held far too much knowledge for a child. "They're just thirsty, sweetheart," Eleanor replied, forcing a lightness into her voice she didn't feel. The main well was nearly dry. Every trip down to check the water level felt like a direct defiance of fate. She approached the well, her boots crunching on the brittle earth. The rope bit into her already calloused palms as she lowered the iron bucket, counting the seconds, her pulse throbbing in her ears, waiting for the familiar splash. The sound, when it came, was a pathetic, distant plink. The water table was plummeting, just as old Paulus Olson, the only true neighbor she had left, had predicted. She hauled up the bucket, barely a quarter full of cloudy, warm liquid. Her 30 longhorns were gaunt, their ribs showing like washboards. She'd already lost 5 calves this season. "Mrs. Vance?" The smooth, city-soft voice made her jump. Marcus Thorne, the representative of the Cedar Ridge Trust Bank, stood at her gate. He was a slight man, impeccable even in the heat, with the cold, assessing eyes of a vulture who knew precisely when to arrive. "Mr. Thorne," she acknowledged, planting her feet firmly. "I'm afraid I'm here on official business, ma'am," he said. "The bank has reviewed the mortgage since your husband's unfortunate departure." "Daniel's death has not changed my ability to work this property," Eleanor stated. "But a woman alone, a young boy, perhaps you'd consider selling. I could ensure you a generous offer, enough to set yourself up comfortably in town." "This land is my son's inheritance," Eleanor said, her voice rising. "I will not sell." Thorne's smile tightened. "The next payment is due in 6 weeks, Mrs. Vance. A considerable sum. I do hope you'll have it." He paused, looking back with a glint in his eye. "And I heard about the unpleasantness at the feed store yesterday, about your credit." The humiliation of being turned away still burned. "Good day, Mr. Thorne," she managed, her voice dangerously cold. After he left, Eleanor leaned against the well curb, allowing herself one moment of raw fear. The gossip in Cedar Ridge was a suffocating cloud. A widow who wore trousers and refused remarriage was an outright scandal. The sun began its long descent, painting the dusty horizon in riotous hues. Against this light, she saw him. A rider, a dark, weary silhouette against the glow. Her hand went instinctively to the rifle by the doorframe. Strangers were rarely a blessing. As he drew closer, she took inventory. The horse was a dark roan gelding, favoring its off-front leg. The rider was tall, broad-shouldered, though slumped in the saddle with fatigue. His face, though layered with trail grit, possessed a rugged handsomeness. His eyes, the color of faded glacial blue, held a profound weariness. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "The name's Caleb Stone. My horse threw a shoe. I was wondering if I might impose on your kindness for the use of your forge and tools. I'll gladly pay for the trouble." "There's a forge in the barn," Eleanor said finally, her grip easing on the rifle. "I'm handy with horses," Caleb said, "and if you have any small work that needs doing, I'd be obliged to trade a few hours of labor for a proper meal. I've been living on hardtack and air for too long." Finn had crept out onto the porch. Caleb noticed him and gave a gentle tip of his hat. "Fine boy you've got there, about the age of my younger brother back in Virginia." "The forge is in the barn," she repeated. "Supper will be ready at sunset. Beans and cornbread, nothing fancy." "Ma'am," Caleb replied, dismounting with a careful favor to his left side, "that sounds like a feast fit for a king." He led his roan toward the barn, moving with the alertness of a man who was always ready but perpetually hoped to avoid confrontation. "Mama," Finn whispered, "is he staying?" "Just for supper," Eleanor said firmly. Yet, as she walked inside, she found herself adding a generous measure of bacon drippings to the pot of beans. It was just Christian charity, she insisted, nothing more. The arrangement that began that evening stretched into a week, then two. Caleb Stone proved to be a quiet, diligent force. He fixed the roan's shoe, but then also repaired a sagging gate and patched a hole in the chicken coop, all before Eleanor had finished the cornbread. He ate his meals with them, but always excused himself quickly to return to the relative anonymity of the barn. He spoke when spoken to, never prying, maintaining a respectful and necessary distance. It was Finn who first breached the wall Caleb had built around himself. The boy took to following him like a small shadow, bombarding him with the relentless questions only a curious 5-year-old can manufacture. Caleb answered them with a surprising, gentle patience. One morning, Finn showed Eleanor a small wooden horse, an heirloom Daniel had carved, broken for months, now whole again, the missing leg perfectly replaced. Eleanor's throat tightened. She had lacked both the time and the skill to fix it herself. "He can stay, Mama?" Finn asked, holding up the mended toy. "We'll see," Eleanor said, that familiar phrase of hedging against disappointment. A knock came early the next morning. Caleb stood at the threshold, hat in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Vance. I came to thank you for the hospitality and settle up before moving on." "You mended the gate and the coop," Eleanor said. "We're square." He studied her, his pale eyes penetrating. "That roof needs work before the first winter storm. So does the corral fence. And that windmill hasn't turned properly in months, unless I miss my guess." All true, all things she had been sacrificing sleep to put off. "That's not your concern, Mr. Stone." "Could be, though. I'm not in any particular hurry. If you could use a hand for a few days more, I work for food and a place to lay my head. That barn's more comfortable than most places I've slept lately." Eleanor knew the curtains were already twitching in Cedar Ridge, yet the list of repairs grew daily, and her pride wouldn't feed Finn come winter. "I can't pay wages," she said stiffly. "Didn't ask for any," he replied, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll start with the roof, if that suits you." And so the arrangement became official. He was a miracle of quiet strength. He worked until his shirt was soaked with sweat and dust, pausing only to answer Finn's inquiries about horses and the trail. One evening, after the boy had been put to bed, they sat on the porch, the air thick with the smell of drying earth and impending disaster. "Were you in the war?" Finn had asked earlier. Caleb had nodded slowly. "I was just a boy myself, really not much older than your mama was then." "Did you kill anyone?" "Yes, son, I did, and it's nothing I take pride in. War makes men do things they spend the rest of their lives trying to forget." Now, Eleanor spoke softly. "You carry a heavy load, Caleb." "We all do," he countered. "What's yours, Eleanor Vance?" "Daniel wanted a wife who was content with cooking and sewing," she said, gesturing at her worn clothes. "He got something else entirely." "He got someone who could save his legacy when he couldn't," Caleb corrected, his voice rough. "That's worth more than all the needlepoint in the world. It's good land, worth fighting for, even against drought and debt and gossip. You're stronger than you know." It was the first time he had used her given name. The air crackled with a sudden, overwhelming tension. Eleanor rose abruptly. "It's late." But as she lay in bed, she didn't dream of Daniel's broken body. Instead, she dreamt of pale blue eyes and the steady thump-thump of hammering on the roof, a sound as rhythmic as a heartbeat, promising that some things could still be mended. The next morning brought trouble in the form of 3 riders: Jed Gable, who owned the general store, Frank Hayes, the blacksmith, and Pastor Williams. They rode in with the self-righteous air of moral inquisitors. "Heard you got yourself a hired man, Widow Vance," Gable said, his face red and disapproving. "I have help with repairs, yes," Eleanor said coolly from the porch. "Living in your barn, eating at your table," Hayes added, his thin face pinched. "People are talking." "People always talk," Eleanor replied. "I have yet to see it bring rain or mend fences." Pastor Williams stepped forward. "Mrs. Vance, we are concerned for your reputation. A young widow, a strange man. Surely you see how it looks." "What I see," Eleanor said, her voice sharp, "is that none of you offered help when my roof leaked or my fence fell down. Mr. Stone works for meals and barn space, nothing more. Now, see here," Gable began, but stopped as Caleb appeared from around the corner, a hammer dangling from his hand. "Gentlemen," Caleb said mildly, but something in his stance made them shift uneasily. "Fine morning, isn't it? I was just about to patch that hole in Mrs. Vance's roof. Unless you're here to help, I'd best get to it." There was a moment of tense silence. Caleb stood relaxed but ready, and Eleanor realized with a jolt that despite his easy manner, this was a man who had faced down worse than 3 town busybodies. They backed down, muttering threats about morality. "They'll make trouble," Eleanor said after they left, her hands trembling. "Perhaps," Caleb agreed. "But men who ride in groups to bully women usually back down when faced directly. If my presence here causes you grief, I'll move on." "No." The word came out faster than she intended. "There's still work to be done." The truth she knew was she couldn't bear to lose the quiet strength he brought to her life. The drought deepened its grip like a tightening fist. By the 3rd week of Caleb's presence, the grass was powder, and the well required twice as many poles to bring up half as much water. They were rationing their drinking supply. "We'll lose them all if we don't move them," Caleb said one evening, watching the dying cattle. "The nearest water is Clear Creek, 20 miles through Carson's Gulch. It's 2 days' drive in this heat," Eleanor countered. "Then we'll start tomorrow," Caleb said simply. "I can manage them if we go together or not at all," Eleanor interrupted. "These are my cattle, my responsibility." He nodded, respecting her resolve. "We'll leave Finn with Mrs. Olson. She owes me that much after I helped deliver her twins last spring." They left before dawn. The cattle moved reluctantly, their usual bellowing reduced to weak complaints. The first day passed in a haze of dust and agonizing heat. As they made camp in a small box canyon, the stars emerged in the vast canvas above. "You handle those cattle like you were born to it," Caleb observed, passing her coffee. "My father raised beef in Tennessee," Eleanor said. "I could rope and ride before I could read. Daniel never liked that about me, said it wasn't fitting for a woman." "Daniel was a fool then," Caleb said bluntly. "He wanted a wife content with cooking. He got a woman who could save his legacy." They sat in comfortable silence until a sound made them both freeze. Horses, moving fast in the darkness. Caleb was on his feet instantly. "Easy there, friend," a voice called out. 3 riders emerged into the firelight. Eleanor's heart sank as she recognized the leader, Silas Blackwood, a notorious cattle rustler and hired thug who worked for the powerful Dalton interests. "Well, well," Blackwood sneered, his grin showing stained teeth. "Caleb Stone. Been a while since Dodge City." Caleb's posture changed subtly, becoming looser, but somehow more dangerous. "Blackwood, still riding with trash, I see." "Now, that's unfriendly," Blackwood's eyes swept over Eleanor. "This your woman, Stone. Pretty thing to be dragging through the desert." "The lady is driving her cattle to water," Caleb said evenly. "We want no trouble." "Cattle, you say?" Blackwood mocked. "Them walking skeletons? Maybe there's other things worth taking." Eleanor slowly stood, her hand near the rifle on her saddle. "You're on my land, Mr. Blackwood. I'll ask you to move along." "Your land? The way I heard it, you're just a widow playing at being a rancher. Maybe you need a real man to show you how it's done." What happened next was a blur. Caleb moved like lightning, his gun clearing leather and firing in one smooth motion. Blackwood's hat flew off his head, a neat hole punched through the crown. Next one goes lower, Caleb said conversationally. The lady asked you to move along. For a moment, violence hung heavy in the air. Then Blackwood slowly retrieved his hat, his face dark with rage. This ain't over, Stone. You neither, widow woman. He and his men rode out quickly. Eleanor was trembling. You knew him from before. Caleb's jaw tightened. We had a disagreement in Dodge. He was bothering a saloon girl. I intervened. Thought I'd seen the last of him. Will he come back? Maybe. Men like Blackwood are cowards at heart, but we'd best keep watch tonight. They took turns guarding, the silence broken only by the crackle of the fire and the rustling of nervous cattle. As dawn broke, they got the herd moving again, both aware they were now racing against more than just drought. By midday, they saw the green line of trees that marked Clear Creek. The cattle, scenting water, surged forward. Eleanor laughed with sheer relief as they splashed into the shallow stream. We made it, she breathed. That evening, camped on high ground, Caleb finally spoke of his past. My wife, Amelia, she was like you. Strong, determined, could outride most men. When she died of fever while I was away on a drive, I blamed myself. Sold everything, started drifting. Figured I didn't deserve another chance at happiness. He looked at her directly across the fire. But then I rode up to a widow's cabin and found someone fighting the whole world to keep her son's inheritance. Made me think maybe running wasn't the answer. Maybe standing and fighting for something worthwhile was. Eleanor reached out and touched his hand. He turned his palm up, their fingers intertwining. Caleb, I know, he said roughly. I know all the reasons this is complicated, but Eleanor, A shot rang out, shattering the moment. Caleb threw himself at Eleanor, pulling her down as more bullets whizzed overhead. Stay down, he ordered, drawing his gun and firing back at the muzzle flashes in the darkness. Blackwood had returned with reinforcements. The firefight was brief and brutal. Caleb fought with cool precision. Eleanor backed him up with her rifle. Finally, a scream of pain was followed by Blackwood's voice cursing. Pull back! Damn you, pull back! When the sound of hooves faded, Caleb pulled her against him, holding her tight, his hands shaking. Damn brave woman, Eleanor Vance! Damn brave! She clung to him, feeling his solid warmth. When he pulled back, moonlight silvering his features, she saw raw desire and something deeper in his eyes. But the moment passed, and they had to see to the scattered cattle. Was he stars? Word of the incident at Clear Creek reached Cedar Ridge before they did. By evening, Eleanor knew everyone was talking about how the widow Vance had spent 3 nights alone on the trail with her hired man. Pastor Williams called the next day, accompanied by Mrs. Gable and Marcus Thorne. Eleanor met them on the porch, wearing her best dress, refusing to hide Caleb, who stood respectfully beside her. Mrs. Vance, Pastor Williams began, we've come to discuss the irregularities in your household arrangement. This drifter has a name, Caleb said mildly, and I'd ask you to speak respectfully to Mrs. Vance. The bank has concerns about the stability of your situation, Thorne chimed in. Alone to an unmarried woman with no male protection. I wasn't aware my marital status affected my ability to pay debts, Eleanor shot back. For the good of the community, for the good of your son's welfare, Pastor Williams insisted. What kind of example are you setting? An example of not giving up when life gets difficult, Eleanor replied. An example of hard work. An example of fornication, Mrs. Gable burst out. Caleb stepped forward, and the 3 visitors stepped back. Ma'am, I'd be real careful about making accusations you can't prove. Where I come from, calling a lady such names can have consequences. Before the tension could break, Silas Blackwood and his men rode into the yard. Well, well, Blackwood called out. Looks like a regular town meeting. You telling them about our encounter, Ryland? Ryland? Pastor Williams stared at Caleb. You know this man? Oh, we go way back, Blackwood grinned. Caleb Stone's got quite a reputation. Fast gun, faster temper. Why don't you tell them about Dodge City, about Frank Morrison? Eleanor saw Caleb's hands clench. Morrison was beating a saloon girl. I stopped him. He drew on me. He lost. Killed him dead, Blackwood confirmed with relish. 1 shot right through the heart. The town won't see it that way, Mrs. Vance. Be a shame if something happened to this nice little ranch. I think you should all leave, Eleanor said quietly. Her hand moved to rest on the rifle. All of you, off my land. Now. After they'd gone, Eleanor sagged onto the porch step, shaking. Caleb sat beside her. I'm sorry, my past. We all have pasts, Eleanor interrupted. You defended a woman who couldn't defend herself. There's no shame in that. Later that night, a violent storm rolled in. Not rain, but wind and lightning. Eleanor stood at her window when a soft knock came at her door. Caleb stood there, his hair wild. Wanted to check you were all right. She stepped back and let him in. They stood facing each other in the lamplight, the storm raging outside. I'm tired of pretending, Caleb, she whispered. Tired of acting like you're just hired help when what? His voice was low, intense. When I lie awake at night thinking about you. When I watch you with Finn and wish things were different. She moved closer. I've been proper. I wore black and kept my head down, but I'm 29 years old, and I'm so tired of being alone. He set his lamp down, his hands cupping her face with infinite gentleness. You sure about this? Once we cross this line, there's no going back. Instead of answering, Eleanor pressed her lips to his. His kiss was desperate, hungry, full of longing. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close. Stay, she whispered. Please, Caleb, stay. He pulled back, his pale eyes dark with desire. I'd give anything to court you proper, to marry you. You deserve that. What I deserve, Eleanor said firmly, is to choose my own path, and I choose you. Outside, thunder crashed like heaven's judgment. Inside, there was only warmth and whispered promises. The greatest risk is often the one we refuse to take. Will Eleanor regret choosing hope over propriety? Keep reading to find out. Dawn came too soon, bringing with it the harsh reality of destruction. The storm had torn through the ranch like an angry giant. The chicken coop lay in splinters, the corral fence was down, and the barn roof that Caleb had patched showed gaping holes. Lost 4 head of cattle, Caleb reported, his face grim. Fence gave way and they scattered. Found 2 with broken legs in the gulch, had to put them down. Eleanor pressed her hands to her face, fighting back tears. With the bank payment due in 2 weeks, and now this. A dust cloud on the horizon caught their attention. George Dalton, owner of the Double D Ranch, led the riders, and with him was Marcus Thorne. Mrs. Vance, Dalton said, his breath clouding in the cold air. Heard you had some trouble with the storm. I'll be straight with you, ma'am. This land's too much for a woman alone. I'm prepared to make you a fair offer. The land's not for sale, Eleanor said automatically. The bank payment is due in 3 weeks, Thorne interjected. With the cattle lost and the damage here, you've got no way to make that payment. Refuse, Dalton shrugged, and the bank will foreclose. You'll have nothing. Thank you for your offer, Mr. Dalton, Eleanor said, though her voice shook. But my answer stands. The land is not for sale. The next days were a blur of desperation. Caleb worked from dawn to dusk, patching what could be patched. They found 8 scattered cattle, but still far short of what they needed. On the 4th day, Caleb saddled his horse. I'm going to find work. The Dixon Ranch is hiring for a drive. It's 2 weeks' work, but the pay, it might be enough to make the difference. Caleb, no. After what happened between us, I can't let you. I'm choosing to help the woman who matters to me, he interrupted gently. I'll be back before the payment's due. Take care of each other. Watching him ride away felt like losing a piece of herself. A week later, Eleanor woke to the smell of smoke. Fire! She rushed outside to see the barn ablaze. The heat was like a wall, the smoke choking, but she could hear her mare, Bess, screaming, trapped inside. Eleanor thrust Finn at the porch, ran for the barn, and fumbled with the stall latches, eyes streaming, lungs burning. She drove Bess and the other horses toward the door. Just as she turned to follow, a burning beam crashed down. Strong arms grabbed her, hauling her bodily from the inferno. Damn fool, woman! Caleb's voice was rough with fear and anger. He dragged her clear of the barn, both of them coughing and gasping. I saw the fire from the ridge. What the hell were you thinking? The horses! To hell with the horses! He pulled her against him, his hands shaking as they checked her for burns. By dawn, the barn was a skeleton of blackened timbers. It was set, Caleb said quietly, showing her a charred can that had held kerosene. Blackwood's work. I'd bet my life on it. It's done, Eleanor said dully. Maybe Dalton was right. Maybe I am a fool. Don't you dare give up, Caleb said fiercely. Not the woman who faced down Blackwood's guns and pulled 3 horses from a burning barn. That woman is the strongest person I know, and she's not alone. Finn reached out from Eleanor's arms to touch Caleb's face. Don't go away again. We need you. Caleb's eyes never left Eleanor's as he answered. I'm not going anywhere, son. Your mama's stuck with me now. Despite the ruins, the impossible debt, the very real threat, a spark of hope rekindled in Eleanor's chest. All right, she said quietly. We fight. We fight, Caleb agreed. They had 2 weeks to work miracles. Winter arrived like an unwelcome guest, the first snow falling in early November. They'd managed to construct a makeshift shelter for the horses from salvaged lumber. Food was scarce. One morning, Dalton arrived with Blackwood and 2 other hired guns. Mrs. Vance, Dalton said, the bank payment is due in 5 days. I'm offering you $500 for the land, enough to start over somewhere else. That's half what it's worth, Caleb said coldly. It's more than she'll have when the bank forecloses, Dalton countered. Refuse, and you leave with nothing but the clothes on your back. Get off my land, Eleanor said quietly. After they left, old Paulus Olson came by, hat in hand. That skunk Dalton offered to buy my water rights, too. One of his men mentioned how sad it would be if something happened to my granddaughter. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. My family and we've been talking. You helped birth our twins. It's not much, but maybe enough to help with the bank. I can't take your money, Paulus. Not taking, borrowing, he insisted. You pay back when you can. No interest. That's what neighbors do. Throughout the day, other neighbors came. Mary Olson brought preserves, others brought a few dollars, or ammunition for defense. By evening, they were still $20 short. My pay from the cattle drive, Caleb said, pulling out his own savings. That makes it enough. Caleb, no, that money is yours. Nothing I have is mine anymore, he said simply. It's ours, if you'll have me. He dropped to one knee right there in the kitchen, with a table full of donated coins and Finn watching wide-eyed. I love you, Eleanor Vance. I want to stand beside you against whatever comes. I want to be Finn's father and your husband, if you'll have a broken-down cowboy with more past than prospects. Say yes, Mama, Finn piped up. Eleanor dropped to her knees, too, framing Caleb's face with her hands. Yes, she whispered. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, with Finn cheering and dancing around them. They had love, they had each other, and they had just enough money to keep the wolves at bay. The courthouse in Cedar Ridge stood like a monument to law and order. Eleanor climbed the steps with Caleb beside her, the payment clutched close to her heart. Elijah Thorne approached with a thin, icy smile. I trust you have the payment? But first, a small matter. Mr. Dalton has filed a claim questioning your legal right to the property. George Dalton rose, flanked by 2 lawyers. I've discovered irregularities in the original land deed. Your late husband may have been claiming land that wasn't rightfully his. The property encroaches on my land by nearly 40 acres, including the water rights to Clear Creek. It was a clever trap. Without the water rights, the land was worthless. This is fraud, Caleb said flatly. That map's been doctored. Dalton's lawyer, Crawford, scoffed. Can you prove it? We have the testimony of our surveyor, Mr. Bernard Hicks, who has sworn his measurements are accurate. We have a witness, Eleanor said, inspiration striking. Paulus Olson. He homesteaded the adjacent property before my husband arrived. He knows the true boundaries. Paulus took the stand, his weathered face determined. The boundary between our land has always been Clear Creek. I helped Daniel survey it myself. We used the federal markers, stone cairns placed by the Army surveyors. Hearsay, Your Honor, Crawford countered. Where are these supposed markers? Paulus's face darkened. Funny thing about that. Went to check last month. They were gone, dug up. Looked like recent work, too. He then produced a worn notebook detailing the placement of the markers. Your Honor, Dalton interrupted, standing. This is ridiculous. We are taking the word of an old immigrant and a woman of questionable morals against an official survey. Questionable morals. Eleanor's temper flared. You want my water rights because your cattle have overgrazed your own land. You've tried to buy me out, burn me out, and now law me out. Can you prove any of these accusations? Crawford demanded. Can you prove Mr. Hicks really surveyed that land? Caleb countered, stepping forward. Or did he just draw lines where Dalton told him to? Hicks went pale. I stand by my survey. Do you? Caleb challenged. Would you stake your professional reputation that you personally measured every foot of that boundary? Hicks glanced nervously at Dalton. There may have been some estimates based on existing documentation. The courtroom erupted. Judge Carlton banged his gavel repeatedly. Your Honor, a new voice interrupted. It was Pastor Williams. I have something to say. I may not approve of Mrs. Vance's choices, but I approve less of bearing false witness. Last week I overheard Mr. Blackwood and another man laughing about digging up some stones near Clear Creek. They were removing boundary markers on Mr. Dalton's orders. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Dalton's face went from red to purple. Judge Carlton regained order, ordering Blackwood detained and an investigation into Hicks's survey. Mrs. Vance, the judge said, looking at her with newfound respect. Do you have your payment? With shaking hands, Eleanor produced the pouch. Every dollar, Your Honor. Then the bank must accept it. The question of boundaries will require further investigation, but until such time as fraud can be proven either way, the status quo stands. The Vance Ranch remains in Mrs. Vance's possession. The gavel came down with finality. Outside in the cold sunshine, Eleanor sagged against Caleb. We did it. We actually did it. You did it, Caleb corrected, wrapping an arm around her. You and your neighbors who wouldn't let a bully win? Finn tugged at their coats. Does this mean we get to keep our home, and Caleb gets to stay forever? Caleb met Eleanor's eyes over the boy's head. If your mama will have me forever. Eleanor confirmed, and didn't care who saw, when Caleb kissed her right there on the courthouse steps. They had won this battle, but they knew the war wasn't over. Spring came like a miracle. By April, the prairie was carpeted with wildflowers, and Clear Creek ran full and strong. Eleanor stood on the porch of the newly rebuilt barn, watching Caleb and Finn work with a young colt. The barn was sturdy, built with the help of the neighbors who had rallied around them after the trial. The next day, she and Caleb were to be married. Pastor Williams, his conscience cleared by his testimony, had agreed to perform the ceremony. Sheriff Thompson rode up, his face grim. Mrs. Vance, Mr. Stone, thought you should know. Silas Blackwood broke jail last night, killed a deputy doing it. A man like Blackwood don't run without settling scores first. We've put our lives on hold for men like Blackwood long enough, Caleb said. Tomorrow we get married as planned, but tonight I keep watch. They sat together on the porch, keeping vigil. Caleb confessed that Blackwood had blamed him for everything that went wrong in his life after their run-in in Dodge. And now he's lost again because of us. Because of his own choices, Eleanor corrected, leaning into his warmth. Men like Blackwood never learn that they create their own misery. Dawn brought Eleanor's wedding day. She wore her mother's gown, carefully altered by Mary Olson. You look beautiful, Caleb murmured from the doorway. The ceremony was held in the yard under a bower of spring branches. Paulus Olson gave Eleanor away. Finn carried the simple gold bands. I, Caleb Stone, take you, Eleanor Vance, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health, in drought and in plenty, through storms and sunshine, until death do us part. Eleanor's voice was strong and clear. And I promise to stand beside you against all who would harm our family, to build with you a life worthy of the sacrifices made to keep this land, and to love you with all that I am, forever. I now pronounce you man and wife. Caleb's kiss was tender, full of promise. Finn wrapped his arms around both their legs, and the three of them stood together, a family at last. As the sun began to set, Eleanor noticed George Dalton on horseback at the property line. He sat for a long moment, watching the celebration, then slowly turned and rode away. It wasn't a surrender, but an acknowledgement that this battle was over. No regrets? Caleb asked softly, his arm wrapped around her waist as they watched their neighbors dance. None, Eleanor said firmly. We've earned this happiness. As if to prove her point, the evening breeze carried the scent of rain, real rain. The drought was ending at last. Later, standing on the porch, watching lightning dance on the horizon, Eleanor leaned into his warmth. "Storm coming. Let it come," she said. "We've weathered worse." The next morning, they learned Blackwood had been caught trying to rob a bank in Colorado and would hang for his crimes. The threat was gone. The ranch prospered under Caleb and Eleanor's combined management. George Dalton made one last attempt to buy the ranch, offering triple his original price. Eleanor took great pleasure in refusing him to his face, with Caleb standing solidly beside her. On their first anniversary, watching another spectacular sunset paint the sky, Caleb pulled Eleanor close and whispered the words that had once seemed scandalous, but now felt like simple truth. "I'd still trade 10 herds for one night with you." Eleanor laughed, the sound carrying across the land they'd fought so hard to keep. "Good thing you don't have to. You've got me for every night, forever." "Forever," Caleb agreed, and kissed her as the first stars appeared in the vast Texas sky. They had started with loss and loneliness, faced down drought and greed and violence. But in the end, love had won. The widow and the drifter had found in each other a second chance at happiness, a family rebuilt from ashes, and a future bright with promise under the endless western sky. The story of Eleanor and Caleb is a testament to the power of resilience and the courage to choose love over fear. If their story of building a future from dust and debt resonated with you, consider the struggles in your own life. What is one piece of land, a goal, a dream, a relationship you are currently fighting for? Take a moment to commit to standing your ground, just as Eleanor and Caleb did.